Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Mary Otis is the author of Burst, and I am so excited. This is our Zibby Books published book for the month of April. So congratulations to Mary. And on behalf of our whole Zibby Books team, we are so excited for you. And here is the episode. Mary Otis is the author of the short story collection, Yes, Yes, Cherries, and now, of course, Burst. Her fiction essays and poetry have been published in Best New American Voices, Electric Literature, Tin House, Ziziva, McSweeney's, Bennington Review, the Los Angeles Times, Los Angeles Review of Books, and numerous other literary journals and anthologies. She has taught fiction at UCLA and was a founding professor in the UC Riverside Low Residency MFA and Creative Writing Program. Originally from the Boston area, Mary lives in Los Angeles. Congratulations again, Mary. Welcome, Mary. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Burst.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. It's so wonderful to be here with you after having you initially acquire my book and seeing everything that has played out since then, and with Zibby Books and the release of the latest two books with Alicia Fernandez Miranda's book, My What If Year, and Andrea Dunlap's book, Women Are the Fiercest Creatures. They're terrific books, and I highly recommend them to everyone. And I also want to congratulate you on your bookshop here in LA.
Oh, thank you.
Beautiful store. It's very thoughtfully curated, and I know everyone in Los Angeles will be happy to go there and check it out. It's just a wonderful, wonderful shop, and will be a new literary hub here in town.
Oh, well, I adore doing the store, having the store, working with Sherry Puzzi and Diana Tramontano on it, and our amazing staff there. So anyway, everybody is so excited about Burst, Mary, and I feel like we've been talking about it for so long that I get so excited when these books finally get to see the light of day. And, it's like the buildup is crazy.
I know, it almost seems like, that's just where that will always keep going. You're like just in this state of you're on the journey. They say it's, not the destination, it's the journey. And then when the destination is around the corner in like 3 weeks, it's almost impossible to conceive, but exciting, of course.
Very exciting. So why don't you tell listeners what Burst is about?
So Burst at its heart is a mother-daughter story. It's about Charlotte and her daughter Viva and their unconventional, very complicated relationship, sometimes fractious, that could also be considered a kind of a love story. And within the book, I also explore generational addiction, artistic ambition, and the idea that forgiveness isn't always a one-time event, but more often an ongoing process.
So true. So how did you come to these characters? How did you arrive at this plot? Like, where did this whole book come from? Tell me the whole thing.
Well, it's funny because this was originally a short story. It was published in Ziziva. The opening chapter was a short story. It wasn't the entire novel. It's a tiny short story, but pretty much the opening is quite similar to the original story, with some changes required just because a novel, there's threads you need to pull through that with a short story. You can leave a question and end on that, whereas you can't quite do that the same way with a novel. So it started with the short story, and I thought I was done with these characters, but they were not done with me. And it was a kind of a favorable haunting that they wouldn't let me go. And I like that feeling. When I get the feeling like something is bothering me or pulling at me, or I can't get it out of my head, I'm hearing lines, I'm hearing them speak, I'm waking up in the middle of the night and writing down things on index cards, then I know it's probably something I really need to pay attention to. So I began to gather more material on them. And at first I thought it was just going to be the mother's point of view, Charlotte. And, started hearing this other little voice coming in too. So yeah, that was the genesis of it. And it's exciting when something that's so short expands to a much, much bigger project. And it's my first novel. So.
Wow. Well, back up a little bit and tell listeners how you got your start in the whole literary world. I know obviously your collection, Yes, Yes, Cherries came out, but take us back for a minute. So where did you grow up? How did you know you loved to write? When did you discover this is something you could really do and all of that?
It was a rather interesting journey to get here because I actually did not think I would be a writer. That was not something I ever planned on doing. And I was always a reader. I studied literature, but I never studied creative writing. And to back up a little, I grew up outside of Boston in a small town called Millis. It's southwest of Boston. And I grew up in a large family with 5 brothers and sisters.
So were you secretly longing for it just to be your mom and you? Is that where this book came from? What if it was just mom and me for a little bit?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's always fascinating when you're, I've met so many people that were an only child who were like, oh, what's it like to have so many brothers and sisters? So I think it's always fascinating when you're on the other side of it. But yes, growing up in such a big family, I'm not quite sure why I wrote about this society of 2 that is just Charlotte and Viva. But there is always kind of a mystery to me as to, I can pull it apart sometimes, usually retroactively, and figure out why I was pulled towards something, but not always. Sometimes there's just an element of mystery, and I accept that. I like that mystery as to why certain things happen the way they do in a story.
What number were you in the birth order?
I'm 5, number 5, but the next child up is 9 years older. So it's sort of like the first group of 4 were much closer in age. Then there was a big break. And then there was my brother and I. My brother's younger than I am.
Oh.
So, I came to writing in just a very serendipitous way. I was out here in Los Angeles. I knew nobody. I had one friend. I had my one friend, and I would call my friend. And, Los Angeles was just really different for me, coming from the East Coast, coming from Boston. I lived in Manhattan for 5 years, and it just was beyond, there was so much to take in. And I would call this friend and tell my friend about things that I saw. And at a certain point, he said, have you ever thought of taking a writing class? Which, I don't know if he was just trying to get me to stop calling him and tell him about a wonderful thing I'm seeing in LA. You wouldn't believe what I saw today or what. But I said, I've never thought of doing that, but why not? And, maybe I'll meet some people since I only have my one friend. And I signed up for the class at a local college. I'd heard, wonderful things about this teacher. And I really liked his name, Jim Crusoe. And it turned out that he is truly, been one of the best teachers not only in Los Angeles, but maybe the entire country. I mean, he's shepherded the careers of so many writers. He's just a truly unique, intuitive, wonderful, wonderful teacher who can teach many types of students, which is, I think, a mark of excellence too, can kind of come in at any level where a writer is at. But I went and I took this class, I signed up for it, and I immediately thought he was brilliant. It was wonderful. It was a mixed level class. So there were a lot of people that were already published. There were a lot of people talking about writing terms that, I didn't know the language yet. And although it was very wonderful and I felt very pulled to it, I also found it overwhelming. And so I left the class because I just felt like it was just beyond in some way, which I find very strange in retrospect, given how central writing is to my life, that, I would almost run from something that was going to be so important for me, which I think, emotions are funny sometimes, how a thrill and excitement and passion can maybe run close to fear, and so maybe the signals got a little misinterpreted, but I did go back to the class. And then I studied with Jim Crusoe for a really long time. So, had my one friend never said, have you thought of taking that class? I'm not sure I would have.
I mean, who is the friend? I think we need to get the friend on the podcast or something.
Oh, the friend's Ben Schick, as somebody I knew long ago in LA. So,
all right. Well, I think you need to write him a thank you note.
I am planning to.
Okay. That's wonderful. And so when did you realize that you love to write short stories?
Well, part of it had to do with the direction from that particular teacher who suggested I write short stories. I mean, it's interesting. I think if he'd said start with a novel, I would have. And being a teacher myself, now I think for me, I can often kind of pick up whether somebody is built to naturally write short stories or naturally go toward the novel. And it's kind of how they're pacing it, how they're looking at it. And there's a certain velocity to a short story. You know, you need to get in and get out. And a lot of people write both. I mean, I write both now, but a short story is a very challenging form because, you know, you don't have a lot of extra room to move. It's end oriented. Often the beginning image or line or paragraph, you know, will run through and somehow tie in at the end. And I love that task of figuring out what that is. So that's how I came to start writing the short stories. But there were people writing novels in that class.
So you took the class and you started writing short stories. And were you working a day job at the same time?
I was. There was like a brief period where I was working at a financial company as like I'd gone in as a temp. And they offered me a job. And as I got more serious with writing, I had this like figure in my mind that I wanted to save, and then I would take some time just to write. And so I did do that, and I quit the job. And I spent the next like 6 months writing, and a lot of things, that thinking of like jump and the net will appear. You know, when I look back at it, that I'm not sure I would be comfortable doing that today. But at the time I was, and a lot of doors opened pretty quickly after that. And I had started to publish, and not super long after that, was offered a book deal by Tin House. And I didn't have a collection yet, but I had some stories published. They'd published a couple of them. And then they, said, do you have a whole collection? And I said, I don't. And they said, well, we'll buy the book and can you write 3 more? So, all because of this one thing, that the friend said, and I went and followed along on that path.
Wow. How much time basically went from your first class, the first day of class, generally, not like, you don't have to do the math, but until Yes, Cherries came out?
I think it was around 6 or 7, because also there was a period where I wasn't sure, I would be still taking the class, but thinking like, this is something I really enjoy doing, but I'm not completely sure yet. And having some of the stories published started really making me think, okay, this is something you can do. And I'd gone to take a workshop with Michael Cunningham at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. And he also was extremely encouraging, saying, yes, this is what, you should be doing. And it was wonderful to study with him. It was, like a 1-week workshop, but he had a big influence on me.
Oh my gosh. That's just this whole thing is so wild. Okay. So then what was it like when the book came out?
Gosh, it was wonderful. I'm sort of flashing on different readings for whatever reason I went to Portland to read at Tin House at their conference that they did, just thinking of the kind of a cascade of events in my mind and seeing people from all parts of your life. I think that's something that's really nice when you have a book come out and, you see somebody from grade school and you see a student you taught 2 months ago and, oh, there's Mrs. Harris, my science teacher, or, it's like, this is your life. So I remember that was very special, that part of it, seeing so many different people. And for some reason, I'm remembering reading at Tin House Conference, and they have it's at Reed College. They have a beautiful amphitheater set up there outdoors. And I remember going up to read, and there was a jogger behind me in the woods that I could hear. And I was like, and had stopped, and I knew they were kind of right behind me. And I thought, like, can the audience see this person, or are they behind the tree? I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but it's like, funny things sometimes happen at readings. They stopped, they did listen, but it was odd to do a reading where you can kind of feel somebody right behind you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll make sure to have a big backdrop or something. Cordon off the back. And so what did you begin to teach, and when do you decide to do that? Sorry, I just want to know your whole story here.
Yeah, no. Teaching, this also kind of came in an unusual way, which was after my book came out, I was doing some, just individual writing classes around town at UCLA. I taught at a couple writing conferences. I was doing a little private workshop of my own, and I was offered a job to help create a MFA program for writing at UC Riverside. So that also was not something I had been intending to do with my life, but I love teaching, and I love working with my students, and I love really helping people get to the essence of what they're trying to say. That's a really special task to me. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like if I hadn't taken the advice of my friend and gone to that class, I wouldn't have, say, published my first thing. If I hadn't published the first thing, I wouldn't have done the book. If I didn't do the book, I wouldn't have had an offer to, teach in this program. So one thing that led to the next, and again, I do believe sometimes when you're taking risks and, kind of throwing yourself into something with your whole heart, a lot of times doors will open and things that were beyond what you could have expected happen,
Oh. And back to Burst for a little bit, now that we have more of a background. Setting the stage, some of the themes in the book revolve around, obviously there's the very complicated mother-daughter relationship and sort of unfulfilled dreams and, all of that. But there's also this theme of addiction. So how did you end up writing about that? Where did that come from? What was it like to write about?
Well, I've known and loved a lot of addicts of different stripes. And, I think that we are a rather addicted culture overall, with some addictions being more accepted than others. But I think there's a lot of people with, whether it's gambling or alcoholism or taking drugs, there's a lot of people seeking relief. And I also wanted to dovetail or draw the line between the idea when you were saying, deferred dreams or whatever with Charlotte and not being able to pursue her art, how when somebody's pursuing an art form, whether it's writing or dance or painting, that's probably like the best drug in the world, because if you're really in it, I'm sure you've experienced this. It's like, it is a transcendence. You are time and space doesn't matter anymore. You are in a totally different reality. And I have seen, unfortunately, a lot of cases sometimes when people are not able to play out not only an artistic dream, but perhaps any kind of dream, how that can become very twisted and lead to, really problematic, hurtful behavior. And how also that same addiction, whatever the thing is, whether it's a drug or food or overdoing anything, it's kind of like the knockoff transcendence. It's like the fake transcendence, like trying to achieve that same thing, but not through that other way. That's such a beautiful way. So that's something I wanted to explore. Also knowing and loving a lot of different artists and some close friends who I saw this happen to. So,
wow. So addiction is basically, the way you're reframing it is really positive, right? It's an attempt to achieve something that only art can bring. So it's just like an attempt to get the close second hit of it, if you will.
Exactly. I mean, obviously there's that's just one angle, but I think it's an angle that isn't explored a lot. And I sometimes think, I've met people that were addicts that if they had ever been able to take their natural gifts and energy and put them in the direction of, I'm just thinking of somebody I met once who I think would have been the most amazing comedian if they could have ever had, one of the funniest people I ever met who, if they could have channeled that all in that direction. And sometimes it's a matter of luck and support. It's hard to be an artist, and it's, you need support. You need support from other artists and other writers. And so sometimes things have to align, but that was something else I wanted to look at as well.
And what did you learn about it after you dove deep by writing the novel?
I don't know. Humans are very complex and very, I read a quote that I liked recently about, people, they don't always behave the same. People behave situationally, not, like this one way they will behave in all situations. And I think that's very true. And I like to try to think about that when I'm working. And, we are vast, we contain multitudes. And that's also something I try to think of when I'm writing characters, because there is no truly bad character or there is no truly good character. And I'm always seeking to try to get inside a character. That really helps me to write and try to, almost like on an acting level, like get inside to try to understand how they see the world and how they react. And if I can lock onto that, then I can, use my imagination to fill in the rest. Or if I can understand one emotional thing, maybe I only understand it on a smaller, level, but I can go deeper into it or really increase it for the sake of the drama in the story.
It's so interesting. It's also so interesting to think that these people aren't real that you're talking about. Do you know what I mean? Like that you get to create, I know this is such a silly point, but that novelists get to just create these characters. I mean, you're right, actors as well, but you get to rewrite it and figure it out. And of course, you're so right. I mean, take anybody going back to their parental home pretty much, and you'll see like a massive regression, like who they were versus like who they are in the workplace. Like they could be completely different people, right?
Oh, yeah. I have a close friend who did share a lot of her growing up stories, which were along the lines of Charlotte and Viva. And that is quite different from, my own growing up. And my mother was quite different than Charlotte and quite traditional, quite conscientious, hardworking. I don't even know what she'd exactly make of Charlotte. But I think there's a little bit of her in there with kind of the salty humor and kind of these offhand remarks. I think she got in there that way a little bit, which is something I always, my mother's passed now, but I loved about her. She could really toss off some zingers,
Oh, are you close with your siblings?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, some of my siblings weren't in the house because they were at college.
Right.
But yes, they're all over the country, and there's some still back on the East Coast. Nobody on the West Coast, a few down south.
And have they read your book?
They've ordered it. So I know they all pre-ordered it. They certainly read Yes, Yes, Cherries.
Oh.
And my brothers and sisters are all very good storytellers. I mean, I think within some families, that's kind of a currency, and when I was young, I remember, sitting there listening to all the older kids tell stories and try to make each other laugh and try to make my parents laugh. And and people would laugh, and so you're always taking it in when you're the younger one, even if I wasn't saying anything, they're very good storytellers.
Huh. Have high hopes for my littlest guy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like you get it by osmosis.
Yeah. I know. I've told him, I'm like, okay, you're going to be an author, just so you know.
I think that's probably likely.
Are you working on anything else right now?
I am. I have a lot of notes on another novel. I'm finishing up a short story. And poetry has become a new form for me that I'm excited about. I just had a couple poems come out, and I didn't expect that exactly, but it's wonderful to work in such a short, condensed form, so it's like I'm working on a novel and then I'm working on poems, and there's, such different forms, but each one can support whatever it is you want to do in such a beautiful way.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very exciting. What advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Trust your instincts, find a good teacher, and trust your subconscious, because I think your subconscious will lead you in directions that you could never have expected and will help you pull a theme through a book in a way you never could have seen coming. Your subconscious always, if you're tapped into it and tuned into it, it might be surprising where it takes you sometimes, but that's for me one of the strongest pieces of advice I would give to a student.
That's great advice. And I have not heard that piece of advice before.
Oh, really?
Yep. So there you go. Well, Mary, thank you for coming on. Thank you for your beautiful book. I am so honored to play a small role in getting this novel out into the world. It would have come out through some other publisher, I know, but I'm just so proud to be affiliated with your beautiful, beautiful writing and storytelling and the way your words make people feel, and you're just so good at it. You're just such a great writer. Anyway, and the story is so wonderful. So thank you for coming along with Zibby Books on this ride, and just know how deeply honored we are.
Thank you so much. That means a great deal to me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited for our lunch together. This will be fun.
Soon. Be in New York soon.
All right. Well, thanks so much.
Thank you, Zibby.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.